Picture this, 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and I'm watching some HOA goon with a reciprocating saw literally cutting through my water line, the screech of metal on metal echoing across the lake, sparks flying onto my gravel driveway, while this guy in a cheap suit stands there filming it like he's documenting some kind of victory. That's the moment I realized Veronica Brightwell, our HOA president and professional nightmare, had just made the biggest mistake of her life. See, I'm Garrett Thornfield, spent 40 years designing water systems for this entire county. Just wanted to retire peacefully in my lakefront cabin, the place where I scattered my wife Martha's ashes. But Veronica decided my rustic property was bringing down her precious neighborhood values. She had no idea that every drop of water flowing into her $800,000 McMansion had to pass through pipes I legally controlled. Now, before you start typing, just sue her, trust me, I had something way more satisfying planned. What would you do in my situation, and where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. 3 months earlier, I was living the retirement dream. Every morning, I'd walk down to my dock with a steaming cup of coffee, breathing in that crisp mix of pine needles and lake water that money can't buy. The crunch of gravel under my boots, the weathered cedar siding that needed paint but had character. This wasn't some fancy resort. This was home. Martha and I had found this 1960s cabin during our last anniversary trip. She fell in love with the loons calling at dawn, the way morning mist danced off the water. After 40 years of managing municipal water systems for Clearbrook County, designing every major pipeline, troubleshooting pressure problems that stumped other engineers, I figured I'd earned some peace. Martha passed 2 years ago. Cancer. I scattered her ashes from that dock on a morning just like the ones we'd shared for 37 years of marriage. The cabin was supposed to be our sanctuary. After she died, it became my lifeline to sanity. Enter Veronica Brightwell. Picture the most entitled person you've ever met. Multiply that by 10, then give her a law degree and an $800,000 lakefront McMansion. That's Veronica. Drives a white BMW that she parks diagonally across 2 spaces, always dressed like she's heading to court even when she's just checking her mailbox. And that clipboard sweet mercy. That woman treats a clipboard like other people treat Holy Scripture. For 8 years, she'd run the Whisper Lake Estates HOA like her personal fiefdom. 12 board members, but let's be honest, they were more like her royal court, nodding along to whatever decree she issued that week. The first time I saw her in action was at a community barbecue. Some poor guy's sprinkler was watering his driveway along with his lawn. Honest mistake happens to everyone. Veronica marched over there with her clipboard, actually wrote him a citation, and announced loudly enough for everyone to hear that property maintenance standards exist for a reason. I should have known right then I'd be in her crosshairs. The trouble started when I attended my first and what I thought would be my last HOA meeting. Figured I should be neighborly, you know? Biggest mistake of my retirement. The moment I walked into that community center, Veronica's eyes locked onto me like a radar system targeting an incoming threat. "Oh," she said, not bothering to hide her disdain, "you must be the gentleman with the rustic cabin." Rustic. She said it like I was harboring a methamphetamine operation. The meeting was everything you'd expect from a power-hungry control freak with too much time on her hands. 45 minutes about proper mailbox heights, another 20 about unauthorized bird feeders attracting undesirable wildlife. Then came the moment that changed everything. "We need to address water usage compliance," Veronica announced, pulling out a thick folder that looked official but smelled like complete fabrication. Properties built before 1985 are required to limit consumption to 200 gallons daily. This regulation protects our community aquifer from depletion. Her eyes found mine across the room. Some residents are using well water and lake access, which constitutes a double violation of our conservation covenant. Now, I'd spent 4 decades in water management. Back in my early days, I'd learned that developers often create HOA rules without understanding actual water law grandfathered properties usually can't be retroactively bound by covenants they never agreed to. But before I could point out this legal reality, she was already steamrolling to the next agenda item. The meeting ended with her approaching me directly. "Mr. Thornfield," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern, "I do hope you'll bring your usage into compliance voluntarily. It would be unfortunate if we had to take more decisive action." 2 weeks later, the certified letter arrived. $5,000 in water violation fines based on an emergency board vote that violated every rule of proper HOA governance. 30 days to pay up and install monitoring equipment or face utility shutoff. That's when I realized this wasn't about water conservation or property values. This was about power and control. This was about forcing out anyone who didn't fit Veronica Brightwell's vision of lakefront perfection. She'd picked the wrong old engineer to intimidate. You know that feeling when someone pokes a sleeping bear? Well, Veronica was about to find out what happens when you mess with a retired engineer who's got nothing but time and 40 years of technical expertise. Her first move came exactly 2 weeks after that threatening letter. I was out on my dock at sunrise, enjoying the smell of coffee mixing with morning mist, when I heard the rumble of diesel engines echoing across the water. 3 trucks pulled into my driveway at 7 a.m. sharp, because apparently Veronica believes in psychological warfare through sleep deprivation. Out stepped 2 guys in matching polo shirts carrying clipboards and official-looking badges. Behind them, Veronica emerged from her BMW like a general surveying a battlefield. The sound of truck doors slamming was probably the most aggressive noise this peaceful lake had heard in years. "Mr. Thornfield," she called out, her voice carrying that fake sweet tone people use when they're about to ruin your day. "These are certified water compliance inspectors. We're here to install monitoring equipment on your well pump." I walked over, still holding my coffee mug. "Morning, Veronica. You got a warrant for that?" She actually pulled out a laminated document. This woman laminated everything like she was preserving historical artifacts. "The HOA covenant grants us access rights for utilities inspection. It's all perfectly legal." Now, I'd read that covenant front to back after her little meeting stunt. What she was waving around was about as legally binding as a grocery list, but her inspectors were already unloading power tools and heading toward my well house. For the next hour, I got to listen to the delightful sound of drilling and hammering while these jokers installed flow meters on equipment they clearly didn't understand. The older guy kept looking at my pressure tank like it was some alien technology. The younger one actually asked if I knew where the water came out. I spent 40 years fixing problems caused by exactly this kind of amateur hour nonsense. While they worked, my neighbor Hazel Murphy shuffled over with a thermos of coffee and that look old-timers get when they've seen this movie before. Hazel's been on this lake since the 1970s, survived 3 hurricanes, 2 economic crashes, and apparently multiple HOA presidents. "She's done this before," Hazel whispered, glancing toward Veronica, who was supervising the installation like she was launching a space mission. "Remember the Kowalski family? Nice Polish couple, lived in that blue cottage where the Hendersons are now. Veronica pulled the same routine bogus violations, harassment, made their lives miserable until they sold." That's when the pattern became clear. This wasn't random tyranny, this was systematic. Veronica had turned HOA harassment into an art form, targeting anyone whose property didn't match her vision of luxury lakefront living. But here's where she made her first tactical error. See, back when I started in municipal water systems, I learned something important. Always research your opponent before engaging. So that afternoon, I drove down to the county courthouse and spent 3 hours digging through property records, HOA incorporation documents, and covenant filings. What I found was beautiful in its simplicity. The Whisper Lake Estates HOA was incorporated in 1987. My cabin was built in 1963, 24 years before this neighborhood association even existed. Under state property law, grandfathered properties cannot be retroactively bound by covenants they never agreed to sign. Veronica's entire legal foundation was built on quicksand. I spent that evening drafting a response letter citing specific statutes and case law, professional, polite, and legally bulletproof. I demanded immediate removal of their monitoring equipment and cessation of all harassment based on invalid covenant claims. The next morning, I hand-delivered copies to every member of the HOA board, the County Water Authority, and Veronica's law firm. Certified mail, return receipt requested, because if there's one thing 40 years in municipal government teaches you, it's the importance of proper documentation. Veronica's response came faster than I expected. Instead of backing down like any reasonable person would when faced with actual legal facts, she doubled down with the kind of spectacular overreach that makes lawyers rich. Her next certified letter claimed my well pump was stealing groundwater from the community aquifer and threatened to file complaints with the county environmental agency. This woman apparently thought she could outmaneuver someone who literally designed the county's water distribution system. You know that moment in chess when your opponent makes a move so obviously wrong that you have to double-check the board to make sure you're not missing something? This was exactly that feeling. Veronica was playing checkers while I was setting up a chess problem she couldn't even see coming. The smell of diesel exhaust from her contractors was still lingering in my driveway when I realized something important. This wasn't going to end with legal letters and bureaucratic procedures. Veronica Brightwell had declared war on the wrong retiree. Time to show her what 4 decades of water system expertise could accomplish when properly motivated. If Veronica thought I'd roll over after her groundwater theft accusation, she was about to learn that retired engineers don't retreat. We regroup and counterattack with precision. Her next move was pure small-town politics at its ugliest. While I was visiting my sick brother in Tampa for a week, she organized what she called an emergency community meeting about water thieves endangering our neighborhood. The timing wasn't coincidental. Veronica had been watching my comings and goings like a surveillance operative. I found out about the meeting from Hazel, who called me while I was sitting in a hospital waiting room. "Garrett, honey, you need to know what that woman's been up to. She's got half the neighborhood thinking you're some kind of environmental criminal." Apparently, Veronica had gone full propaganda mode. She'd printed flyers with my photo taken from the county water department website without permission, claiming I was depleting the aquifer for personal gain while honest families watched their wells run dry. She even organized carpools to pack the meeting with newer residents who didn't know the first thing about local water systems. The really clever part was her fear campaign. She told people that old-timers like me were grandfathered into unlimited water usage that would eventually drain everyone else's wells. Complete nonsense, but effective nonsense if your audience doesn't understand hydrogeology. But Veronica made one crucial mistake. She scheduled the meeting for Thursday night, and I came home Wednesday. Thursday evening, I walked into that community center carrying my laptop, a portable projector, and 40 years of county water data. The place was packed, probably 60 people, biggest HOA turnout in years. Veronica had positioned herself at the front like she was delivering a State of the Union address. She was mid-sentence, explaining how certain selfish individuals were threatening our children's water security when I cleared my throat from the back of the room. "Sorry I'm late," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mind if I add some technical perspective to this discussion?" The color drained from Veronica's face like someone had opened a valve. I set up my equipment while she sputtered about proper meeting procedures and scheduled speakers only. Then I put up my first slide, 40 years of county aquifer data showing water table levels completely stable, with usage patterns that proved my cabin consumed less water than the average household because, it's just one guy living there. "Ms. Brightwell claims I'm stealing groundwater," I said, clicking to my next slide. "But artesian wells like mine tap a completely different water table than the municipal supply system. They're not connected, it's basic geology." I could see people in the audience looking confused, then annoyed, as they realized they'd been fed complete misinformation. But I wasn't done educating them. "Here's something everyone should know," I continued, pulling up a county geological survey. "You can request your local water authority's aquifer data to debunk any bogus depletion claims. It's public information and it shows exactly what I'm telling you. There's no water shortage here." That's when Frank Kowalski stood up from the middle of the room. Frank's a Vietnam vet, built like a fire hydrant with the kind of quiet authority that makes smart people listen. "She did the same damn thing to us," he said, pointing at Veronica. "Lies, harassment, made our lives hell until we couldn't take it anymore and sold our place for half what it was worth." The room went dead silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Suddenly other voices joined in. The elderly Hendersons admitted Veronica had threatened them over their unauthorized vegetable garden. A young couple revealed she'd been fining them for their work van because it supposedly violated commercial vehicle restrictions. A disabled veteran named Carlos showed documentation proving Veronica had actually tried to ban his service dog from community areas. The pattern was undeniable. Veronica systematically targeted anyone who didn't fit her vision of a luxury community. Blue-collar retirees, young families, veterans, elderly folks on fixed incomes, anyone whose lifestyle didn't match her country club fantasies. That's when Veronica lost her composure completely. "This is about maintaining property standards," she snapped, her professional facade cracking like ice in spring. Some people simply don't belong in a premium lakefront community. We have standards for a reason. The room erupted. People were shouting, chairs were scraping, and Veronica's carefully orchestrated meeting had turned into a full-scale revolt against her reign of terror. But here's where things got interesting. While everyone was arguing, I noticed someone else had slipped into the back of the room. Janet Rodriguez, from the County Water Authority. Janet and I had worked together for 15 years before I retired. She caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod. After the meeting dissolved into chaos and people started filing out, Janet approached me by the parking lot. The smell of cooling asphalt mixed with lake breeze created the perfect backdrop for what she told me next. "Garrett," she said quietly, "you should know, Veronica's been filing false complaints with our office for 3 years. We've been building a harassment case against her." Game changer. If I thought Veronica would retreat after being publicly exposed as a serial harasser, I clearly underestimated the lengths a cornered narcissist will go to protect their kingdom. Her counterattack came with the subtlety of a freight train and twice the destructive potential. Monday morning, I woke up to find legal papers taped to my front door because apparently proper service was too dignified for this war. Veronica had hired Blackstone & Associates, a law firm that specialized in HOA enforcement and had the moral flexibility of a weather vane. They were seeking an immediate injunction to shut off water to my property, claiming imminent health emergency due to alleged septic contamination. The beautiful irony? She was claiming my septic system was polluting the very aquifer she'd spent weeks insisting I was stealing from. But here's where Veronica showed her true genius for manipulation. That same afternoon, the local newspaper ran a front-page story. "Lake resident refuses water conservation compliance." The article painted me as a stubborn old-timer who flouts environmental regulations, while Veronica appeared as an environmental champion protecting precious community resources. Reading that piece was like watching someone describe a sunset as an explosion technically accurate words arranged to create a completely false picture. The reporter had clearly gotten all his information from Veronica's legal team. No attempt to contact me, no investigation of the actual facts, just regurgitation of her talking points wrapped in journalistic language. According to this masterpiece, I was single-handedly threatening the lake's ecosystem while refusing reasonable conservation measures. Now, most people would hire an expensive attorney at this point, but 40 years in municipal government teaches you something valuable. Sometimes the best defense is making your opponent prove their ridiculous claims in front of people who actually understand the subject. Instead of lawyering up, I filed a pro se response representing myself. My counter-argument was beautifully simple. If Veronica wanted to claim environmental contamination, she could damn well prove it with actual evidence instead of speculation and hysteria. I demanded comprehensive soil and water testing at her expense conducted by certified environmental labs, with results reviewed by county health officials. Environmental health claims require actual evidence, not the legal equivalent of throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what sticks. The testing took 2 weeks and cost Veronica's legal fund about $8,000, worth every penny for the entertainment value alone. The results were poetry in scientific form. My property showed zero contamination cleaner than most lakefront lots, actually. My septic system was functioning perfectly, well within all environmental standards. The soil samples revealed nothing more dangerous than earthworms and good bacteria. But here's where the universe decided to demonstrate its sense of humor. The comprehensive testing also revealed that Veronica's own septic system had minor violations, an overflow issue that had been slowly leaching into the lake for months. Not dangerous, but definitely ironic given her environmental champion act. More importantly, the property boundary survey required for the environmental assessment revealed something I'd completely forgotten about. The original 1963 deed for my cabin included an easement I hadn't thought about in decades, something about perpetual access and maintenance authority over water infrastructure serving lakefront properties. Back when this lake was developed, the most efficient route for the main water line from the county system ran directly through what became my property. My predecessor, the guy who built my cabin, was a civil engineer who surveyed the whole project. The 1960s handshake deals that built this community had created legal rights that survived every property transfer since. The texture of those old survey documents, yellowed with age and smelling faintly of old ink, felt like holding pieces of history. But what they contained was absolutely beautiful. Legal authority over the water infrastructure serving every single house in Veronica's precious HOA. While I was digesting this revelation, community support was building in ways that surprised me. Hazel Murphy organized a Coffee for Garrett fundraiser that raised $1,200 for my legal expenses. Dave Morgan from the hardware store offered free research assistance and technical support. Frank Kowalski shared his story publicly, encouraging other harassment victims to speak up. Even Carlos, the disabled veteran Veronica had targeted over his service dog, stopped by with documentation proving a pattern of discrimination that went far beyond water usage complaints. But Veronica wasn't finished. Realizing she was losing the factual and legal battle, she decided to go nuclear with personal destruction tactics. Word started spreading around town that I was mentally unstable, that grief over Martha's death had made me paranoid and dangerous. She actually suggested to people that Martha would be ashamed of my behavior if she were alive to see it. That crossed every line that mattered. Up until that moment, I'd been fighting defensively, responding to her attacks, correcting her lies, defending my rights. But when someone dishonors the memory of your late wife to score points in a petty neighborhood dispute, defensive stops cutting it. Time to go on the offensive. You know that moment in every great story when the underdog discovers they've been holding the winning hand all along? Well, mine came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and a pile of legal documents that would change everything. I'd been reviewing property surveys for my legal defense, cross-referencing boundary lines and easement records when something caught my eye. A small notation on my original 1963 deed that I'd never paid attention to, including perpetual easement rights for water infrastructure maintenance and access. Most people would have glossed right over that bureaucratic language. But when you've spent 40 years designing municipal water systems, phrases like perpetual easement rights light up in your brain like neon signs. I pulled out the county's infrastructure maps documents I'd helped create back in the 1980s when we modernized the whole lakefront water system. The sound of papers rustling filled my quiet kitchen as I spread survey maps across the table, tracing water lines with my finger. That's when I saw it, the beautiful, perfect, absolutely delicious irony of the situation. The main water line serving every single house in Whisper Lake Estates, all 47 properties, including Veronica's $800,000 McMansion, ran directly through my property. Not near it, not around it, but straight through the middle of my land, following an easement that had been established before most of these fancy houses even existed. Here's how it worked. Back in the early 1960s, when this lake was just wilderness and fishing cabins, the county needed to run water service to the scattered properties. The most efficient route from the county main line required crossing several private lots. My predecessor, a civil engineer named Bill Hendricks, who built my cabin, had surveyed the entire project and negotiated easement rights that gave him legal authority over the infrastructure. Those rights transferred with the property deed, which meant that for 24 years I'd unknowingly held legal control over the water supply to an entire neighborhood. Utility easements often grant surprising legal powers to original grantees, powers that can override HOA authority, municipal regulations, and even some state laws. The guy who builds the road gets to control access to the road. It's basic property law that most people never think about until they need it. The delicious irony was breathtaking. Veronica had spent months threatening to cut off my water when I actually held the legal authority to shut off hers. Every drop of water flowing into those million-dollar homes had to pass through pipes on my property, under easements I controlled. It was like watching someone threaten to ground their own parent. I spent the rest of that night researching easement law, confirming what I suspected. Under state property law, easement holders can restrict access for safety reasons, maintenance requirements, or violation of easement terms. I had the legal right to shut down the entire water system for infrastructure inspection whenever I deemed it necessary. But here's the thing about 40 years in public service. You learn that power without responsibility is just bullying. I could have called the county water department the next morning and shut off service to the entire HOA out of spite. Nuclear option, immediate satisfaction, total victory. Instead, I decided to use this leverage more strategically. The smell of fresh coffee and morning lake air drifted through my kitchen windows as sunrise painted the water gold. Somewhere across that peaceful lake, Veronica Brightwell was probably sleeping soundly in her McMansion, completely unaware that the man she'd been trying to destroy held the power to turn her luxury lifestyle into a very expensive camping experience. I folded those survey maps carefully, placed them in a manila envelope, and smiled for the first time in months. Time to teach a lesson in respect. Lesson. The thing about being an engineer is that you never rush into action without a proper plan. And after discovering I held the keys to Veronica's entire water kingdom, I needed to assemble the right team and execute this with surgical precision. My first call went to Janet Rodriguez at the County Water Authority. We'd worked together for 15 years, and if anyone understood the legal implications of utility easements, it was Janet. She agreed to meet me for coffee at Mabel's Diner, the kind of place where locals go to avoid tourists and HOA presidents. "Garrett," she said, sliding into the booth across from me, "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to take Veronica down a few pegs. What do you need?" The aroma of bacon grease and coffee mixed with the excitement of conspiracy planning as I spread the easement documents across the table. Janet's eyes widened as she studied the survey maps. "Sweet mother of pearl," she whispered, "you control their entire water supply." We spent 2 hours mapping out the legal strategy. Under state law, easement holders can invoke emergency maintenance protocols for infrastructure safety, which meant I could legally restrict water access for inspection and repair purposes. The key was doing it by the book, with proper documentation and legitimate safety concerns. Janet agreed to provide technical support and county backing for any maintenance decisions. More importantly, she offered to attend the next community meeting as an official observer, lending government credibility to whatever bombshell I decided to drop. Next, I recruited Frank Kowalski. Frank had lived through Veronica's harassment campaign and had the kind of military bearing that commanded respect. Plus, he knew where all the neighborhood skeletons were buried, metaphorically speaking. We met at his garage while he worked on his classic Mustang, the smell of motor oil and determination filling the air. "You want to take her down?" he asked, not looking up from the engine. "Count me in. That woman destroyed my family's peace of mind." Frank's role was intelligence gathering and community coordination. He had contacts among the old-timers who remembered the original lake development, and he could organize support without tipping off Veronica's spy network. Hazel Murphy became our communications hub. At 78, she had the perfect cover of being a harmless old lady, but she ran the neighborhood gossip network like a CIA operation. Her house became our unofficial headquarters, with the added benefit of apple pie and strategic planning sessions. "Honey," she said, pouring coffee while we reviewed our timeline, "I've been watching that woman terrorize this community for 8 years. It's time someone reminded her that respect works both ways." Dave Morgan from Morgan's Hardware provided technical support and equipment. Turned out Dave had a background in municipal engineering before opening his store, and he understood exactly how water systems worked. He also had access to the kind of professional-grade equipment that would make our documentation look official. "Here's something most people don't know," Dave explained while we examined pressure gauges and flow meters. Municipal water systems have master shutoffs every 500 to 1,000 feet for maintenance purposes. They're usually disguised as utility boxes or manholes that nobody pays attention to. The beauty of our plan was its simplicity. We weren't going to sabotage anything or cause actual harm. Instead, we'd invoke legitimate maintenance protocols that would demonstrate exactly who held the real power in this neighborhood dispute. Our research revealed that Veronica had never bothered to check the original infrastructure easements when she bought her property. Title insurance companies are required to provide copies of all easement documents, but most people never request them. Big mistake when you're planning to wage war against your neighbors. We spent 3 weeks preparing documentation that would satisfy any legal challenge. County Water Department inspection forms, infrastructure safety checklists, maintenance scheduling protocols, everything an experienced water systems engineer would need to justify temporary service restrictions. The psychological strategy was equally important. We decided to let Veronica believe she was winning right up until the moment we revealed our trump card. Frank would spread word through his network that I was considering selling and tired of fighting. Hazel would mention to her bridge club that I seemed defeated and ready to give up. Meanwhile, I practiced my presentation until I could deliver technical information with the calm authority of someone who'd spent 4 decades managing critical infrastructure. No emotion, no personal attacks, just professional competence explaining reality to people who'd been living in Veronica's fantasy world. The final piece was timing. We needed maximum witnesses for the revelation, which meant waiting for the next scheduled HOA meeting. But we also needed to coordinate with county officials and local media to ensure the story got told properly. As I sat on my dock that evening, watching sunset paint the lake gold while loons called in the distance. I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine excitement. Not for revenge, but for justice. For teaching a lesson about respect and community that would benefit everyone on this lake. The crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked back to the cabin sounded like the footsteps of inevitability. Veronica Brightwell was about to learn that real power doesn't come from bullying. It comes from knowing what you're talking about. Game time was approaching. You know that old saying about giving someone enough rope to hang themselves? Well, Veronica was about to weave herself a noose out of pure arrogance and overconfidence. Word had gotten back to her through the neighborhood gossip network that I was broken and ready to surrender. Frank had done his job perfectly, letting slip at the marina that I'd been asking about real estate agents and seemed defeated by all the legal pressure. Hazel had mentioned to her bridge club that I looked tired and was probably going to sell and move somewhere quieter. Veronica took the bait like a hungry bass hitting a perfectly presented lure. Instead of declaring victory quietly and moving on to her next target, she decided to make a public spectacle of my supposed defeat. She called an emergency HOA meeting for the following Thursday, ostensibly to formalize water usage enforcement actions, but really to parade my surrender in front of the entire community. But here's where her ego got the better of her strategic thinking. She invited county officials to witness what she called effective environmental enforcement. She contacted the local newspaper to document her successful protection of community resources. She even arranged for the cable access TV crew to film the meeting for posterity. Veronica Brightwell was about to create the most thoroughly documented case of public humiliation in HOA history. The harassment campaign leading up to the meeting was relentless and increasingly desperate. Anonymous complaints started flooding the county about my property noise violations for my morning coffee routine, health hazards from my vegetable garden, environmental concerns about my bird feeders attracting disease-carrying wildlife. Someone cut my phone line on Tuesday night. I caught it on the security camera Dave Morgan had helped me install, a figure in dark clothing with bolt cutters, working by flashlight. The footage wasn't clear enough to identify the person, but the timing was awfully convenient for Veronica's narrative about my deteriorating mental state. Wednesday morning brought a code enforcement officer to my door, responding to complaints about structural safety violations and potential health hazards. The poor guy looked embarrassed as he explained he was required to investigate every complaint, even obviously frivolous ones. "Mr. Thornfield," he said, checking items off his clipboard with the enthusiasm of someone doing homework, "I'm supposed to inspect your septic system, electrical panels, and structural integrity based on anonymous reports of dangerous conditions." I made him coffee while he did his inspection, chatting about his job and the ridiculous complaints he had to investigate. Turned out he'd been getting 3 to 4 calls a week about my property for the past month, all from the same phone number, though the caller refused to identify herself. The inspection revealed what any sane person would expect: a well-maintained cabin with modern electrical, a properly functioning septic system, and structural integrity that could probably survive another 60 years. He wrote "no violations found" on every line of his report and apologized for wasting my time. Meanwhile, Veronica was making the rounds of newer residents, painting herself as the defender of property values against my disruptive presence. She held informal coffee meetings in her living room, showing selected photos of my property that made it look shabby compared to the manicured lawns of the McMansion crowd. Her masterstroke was the press release she sent to local media. HOA successfully resolves water conservation dispute through firm community standards enforcement. According to her version of events, I had agreed to comply with all regulations and would be bringing my property into alignment with community expectations. Complete fiction, but she was so confident in her victory that she was already writing the history books. The beautiful irony was that while Veronica was busy planning her victory celebration, I was putting the finishing touches on documentation that would reveal her entire power structure as an illusion built on ignorance and intimidation. Janet Rodriguez stopped by Wednesday evening to review our presentation materials. The smell of fresh ink on County Water Department letterhead mixed with the evening lake breeze as we went through our checklist one final time. "You know," she said, organizing the official documents that would legitimize everything we were about to do, "in 30 years of water management, I've never seen someone dig their own grave this thoroughly. She's invited every official witness she could think of to watch her get publicly humiliated. That night, I sat on my dock with a glass of wine, listening to the loons call across water that reflected stars like scattered diamonds. Tomorrow, I would walk into that community center looking like a defeated old man ready to surrender. I would let Veronica have her moment of triumph, let her commit fully to her narrative of dominance and control, and then I would show her what real power looked like. The crunch of gravel under my feet as I walked back to the cabin sounded different somehow, like the footsteps of justice finally catching up to someone who'd spent too long believing their own propaganda. Veronica Brightwell was about to learn that the most dangerous opponent is the one who lets you think you've already won. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel sharper, more vivid. Perfect weather for what was about to become the most spectacular public meltdown in Whisper Lake Estate's history. I arrived at the community center 30 minutes early, carrying a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had seen better decades. Inside were the documents that would change everything, but from the outside I looked like exactly what Veronica expected, a tired old man ready to wave the white flag. Veronica had transformed the meeting into a multimedia production. She'd brought a locksmith, a water system technician, who looked suspiciously like the handyman from her property management company, and enough official-looking paperwork to stock a small law office. The local newspaper photographer was setting up equipment while the cable access crew tested their cameras. She'd even arranged the seating strategically, her supporters clustered in the front rows for maximum intimidation, with newer residents who didn't know the full story filling the middle section. My allies were scattered throughout the room, maintaining the appearance that community support had evaporated. The turnout was incredible. 86 people packed into a space designed for 60, with folks standing along the walls and crowding the entrance. Word had spread that this would be the final confrontation, and nobody wanted to miss the show. Veronica opened the meeting wearing her best courtroom attire, navy blue suit, pearl necklace, and that clipboard held like a scepter of authority. She'd prepared what sounded like a victory speech, complete with references to protecting our community's future and the importance of standards in maintaining property values. Tonight, she announced, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who believed they'd already won, we finalize the water usage enforcement action that will set a precedent for responsible environmental stewardship in our community. She gestured toward me with theatrical concern. Mr. Thornfield has indicated his willingness to comply with all regulations and bring his property into alignment with community expectations. This represents a victory for every family that calls Whisper Lake Estates home. The crowd murmured approval, exactly as she'd choreographed. Her supporters nodded sagely while the newer residents looked relieved that the troublemaker had finally been brought to heel. That's when she made her fatal mistake. Before we formalize this resolution, Veronica continued, pulling out what looked like an official water termination order, I want to demonstrate our authority to take decisive action when community standards are threatened. She signaled to her handyman, who produced a large wrench and headed toward the door. We have the legal right and community responsibility to shut off water service to properties that refuse to comply with conservation regulations. The room fell silent except for the whir of camera motors and the scratch of pens on notepads. Veronica was about to order the physical disconnection of my water service in front of 86 witnesses and 3 different media outlets. Any final comments before we proceed? She asked, looking directly at me with barely concealed triumph. I stood up slowly, pulling my briefcase onto the table with the careful movements of someone much older and more defeated than I actually felt. Well, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, there is one small technical detail we should probably discuss first. Veronica's smile widened. She was expecting my surrender speech. Instead, I opened my briefcase and pulled out the laminated survey documents, the county water department letterhead, and the easement records that Janet Rodriguez had helped me organize into an impressive presentation package. Has anyone here actually checked who controls the water line you're threatening to shut off? I asked, my voice suddenly stronger and more professional. The silence stretched long enough for people to start shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. Veronica's confident expression began showing the first cracks of uncertainty. I unfolded the survey map across the table, the sound of paper rustling amplified by the room's sudden attention. According to county records filed in 1963 and confirmed by the Water Authority this week, I hold perpetual easement rights over the main water line serving this entire neighborhood. You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. Ms. Brightwell, I continued, pulling out my retired county water department badge and placing it next to the documents. You've spent months threatening to cut off my water. But here's the thing. I designed this system 35 years ago. Every pipe, every valve, every pressure regulation point. The handyman with the wrench had stopped moving toward the door and was staring at me like I just announced I was actually Superman. The water line serving all 47 properties in this HOA runs directly through my land, under easements that give me legal authority over maintenance, access, and emergency shutoffs. I looked directly at Veronica, whose face had gone pale as fresh snow. You want to shut off my water? That's interesting, because as of Monday morning, I'll be conducting a comprehensive safety inspection of the entire system. County regulations require a 72-hour service interruption for proper testing. The beautiful irony hung in the air like morning mist over the lake. Ms. Brightwell, you don't control my water. I control yours. The silence that followed my revelation was the kind of dead quiet you only hear right before something explosive happens. 86 people holding their breath while the implications of what I'd just said sank into their collective consciousness. Veronica's face went through a spectacular range of emotions: confusion, disbelief, panic, and finally a desperate anger that made her voice crack when she tried to respond. That's impossible, she stammered, her professional composure evaporating like steam. HOA authority supersedes individual property rights. You can't just... This is ridiculous. Janet Rodriguez stood up from the back of the room, her county water department uniform lending instant credibility to the proceedings. Actually, Ms. Brightwell, Mr. Thornfield is absolutely correct. I've reviewed the easement documentation, and it's all legitimate and properly filed. She walked forward, carrying an official folder with the county seal visible to everyone. Utility easements predate HOA authority by state law. The infrastructure serving this neighborhood crosses Mr. Thornfield's property under legal agreements that give him maintenance authority over the entire system.